Johnny Carson asked Dean Martin a question that nobody had dared to ask in 25 years. The Tonight Show studio went completely silent. America was watching. Dean looked at Johnny, then at the camera, and made a decision that would change everything. "You want the truth?" Dean said. "It's apple juice. It's always been apple juice." What Dean revealed in the next 3 minutes wasn't just about a drink. It was about a lie that had defined his entire career and the tragic reason he'd been living it for a quarter century. It was October 1975, and Dean Martin was sitting on the familiar couch of The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. At 58 years old, Dean was still one of the biggest stars in entertainment. His variety show was a hit. His Vegas shows sold out months in advance, and everywhere he went, people expected the same thing. Dean Martin with a drink in his hand, that slightly tipsy swagger, that slurred charm that had made him famous. The first 20 minutes of the interview had been typical Tonight Show fare. Dean told stories about Frank Sinatra. Johnny made jokes about Dean's reputation as a drinker. The audience laughed at all the right moments. Ed McMahon sat at his desk, grinning and occasionally chiming in with a quip. But then Johnny did something unexpected. He set down his note cards, leaned forward, and his expression changed. The playfulness left his eyes. He looked at Dean the way a serious journalist looks at a subject before asking the difficult question. "Dean," Johnny said, "I have to ask you something, and I want you to know this comes from a place of genuine curiosity, not judgment." Dean's smile flickered, just for a second, but if you were watching closely, and millions were, you could see something shift in his eyes, a wall going up, or maybe coming down. "Shoot," Dean said, keeping his voice light. "All these years, the drink in your hand during performances, the stumbling, the slurred speech, everyone wants to know." He paused. "Is it real? Are you really drinking?" The studio audience went quiet. This wasn't the usual Tonight Show banter. This was real. For 20
Dean's father, Gaetano Alfonso Crocetti, had come to America from Italy in 1913 with nothing but hope and a pair of barber scissors. He settled in Steubenville, Ohio, a tough steel town, and opened a small barber shop. Gaetano worked hard, saved money, and started a family. For a while, life was good. But Gaetano had a problem. He drank. At first, it was just a glass of wine with dinner, the Italian way. Then it was a drink after work to relax. Then it was drinking during work. Then it was drinking all the time. Dean was 7 years old when he realized his father was different from other fathers. Other dads came home from work and played with their kids. Dean's father came home and went straight for the bottle. Other fathers saved money for their families. Dean's father spent it at the bar. "I watched my father destroy himself," Dean said, and his voice was different now. Not the smooth, cool Dean Martin voice that America knew. This was raw, real. "I watched him lose our money. I watched my mother cry. I watched him stumble home night after night, barely able to stand, reeking of cheap whiskey." The studio was still silent. People were crying, not laughing, crying. "When I was 15, Dean continued, my father died, cirrhosis of the liver. He literally drank himself to death. And at his funeral, I made a promise. I swore on his grave that I would never touch alcohol, that I would never become him, that I would never put my family through what he put us through." Johnny Carson wiped his eyes. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was confession. This was therapy happening on national television. "So how did you end up playing a drunk?" Johnny asked gently. Dean smiled, but there was no humor in it. Irony, right? The thing I feared most, I turned into my career. "It started in 1950, Dean explained. He and Jerry Lewis were performing at the Copacabana in New York. They'd had a few drinks before the show, real drinks, and their act was loose, spontaneous, funnier than usual. The audience loved it. After the show, their manager said, "Whatever you did tonight, do it every night." But Dean couldn't do it every night, not really, because every time he drank for real, he saw his father's face. He felt that old fear creeping back. So Dean made a decision. He would pretend. He'd create a character, the lovable drunk, but he'd stay sober while playing him. "I studied my father," Dean said. "I remembered how he moved, how he spoke, how he carried himself, and I turned my worst nightmare into entertainment. I made people laugh at the thing that had destroyed my childhood." That must have been... Johnny struggled to find the word. "Painful?" Dean offered. "Every single night, Johnny. Every single performance. I'd hold that glass of apple juice, and I'd think about my father. I'd stumble a little, and I'd remember him stumbling through our front door. I'd slur my words, and I'd hear his voice, slurred and broken, trying to tell my mother he'd do better, that he'd stop. But he never did." The audience was transfixed. This wasn't the Dean Martin they knew. This was a man they'd never seen before. Vulnerable, honest, human. "Why didn't you just play a different character?" Ed McMahon asked from his desk. "Because it worked," Dean said simply. "People loved the drunk. They felt..." "Except you," Johnny said quietly. "Except me," Dean agreed. For 25 years, Dean Martin had lived this double life. In public, he was the lovable drunk. In private, he was a man who wouldn't touch alcohol, who kept his promise to a father who'd broken all his promises. Dean's friends knew the truth. Frank Sinatra knew. Sammy Davis Jr. knew. His family knew. But the public didn't, and Dean felt like he couldn't tell them. "Why tell us now?" Johnny asked. "After all these years, why tonight?" Dean was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I'm tired, Johnny. I'm tired of lying. I'm tired of pretending. I'm 58 years old, and I've spent more than half my life playing a character. And lately I've been thinking, what's the point? What am I protecting? My career? My image? None of that matters if I can't be honest about who I am." He paused, then continued with more strength. "And maybe if people know the truth, it'll help someone. Maybe there's a kid out there watching this whose father drinks, and maybe that kid thinks alcoholism is funny because that's what I've been showing them for 25 years. Maybe if that kid knows the truth, that it's not funny, that it's tragic, that it destroys families, maybe they can help their father before it's too late." The studio erupted in applause, but it wasn't the usual Tonight Show applause. This was different. People were standing. They were crying and clapping at the same time. This was applause for courage, for honesty, for a man who just risked everything to tell the truth. Johnny Carson stood up. He crossed to Dean and embraced him. And for the first time in his career as host of The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson cried on camera. When they broke for commercial, Johnny stayed with Dean. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen on this show," he said. "Thank you for trusting us with that." Dean nodded, overwhelmed. "I don't know if I just ruined my career or saved my soul." "You did both," Johnny said, "and you did the right thing." When they came back from commercial, the mood had shifted. Dean and Johnny talked about other things, lighter things, but everyone watching knew they'd witnessed something historic. This wasn't just celebrity gossip. This was a cultural moment. Dean Martin, one of America's most beloved entertainers, had just shattered his own image and rebuilt it in real time. The next day, the phone calls started.
Critics who dismissed Dean as a lightweight entertainer suddenly took him seriously. He was nominated for awards he'd never been considered for before. He was interviewed not just as a celebrity, but as someone with something important to say. But more than any award or accolade, Dean felt something he hadn't felt in 25 years. Free.
He'd been carrying the weight of that lie for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to just be himself. Years later, in one of his last interviews, Dean was asked if he regretted the reveal on The Tonight Show. "Not for a second," he said. "That night, I got to be honest for the first time in my adult life. I got to honor my father by finally admitting what alcoholism really did to our family. And I got to maybe help some people by showing them that you don't have to be defined by your past. You can break the cycle." Dean Martin died on Christmas Day, 1995, at the age of 78. In his obituaries, they mentioned his singing, his acting, his comedy, his friendship with Sinatra, his place in the Rat Pack, but many of them also mentioned that night on The Tonight Show in 1975, the night Dean Martin stopped playing a character and started being himself. Because in the end, that's what people remember most, not the performances, not the awards, not the image. They remember the moment when a man decided that truth was more important than fame, when a son honored his father by refusing to become him, when an entertainer became more than entertainment and reminded us all that the bravest thing any of us can do is simply tell the truth. Dean Martin spent 25 years playing a drunk to make America laugh, but in 3 minutes of honesty on The Tonight Show, he did something more important. He showed America that behind every joke, there's a person. Behind every performance, there's truth. And sometimes the most powerful performance is the one where you stop performing altogether. If this story of courage and honesty moved you, please subscribe and hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late to tell the truth. Let us know in the comments, have you ever had to choose between protecting an image and being honest? We'll see you in the next video with more incredible true stories from entertainment history.